Hi everyone, my name is Louis Alexander. I am an adventurer, an explorer and a two-time Guinness World Records holder. I've been lucky to embark on adventures across all of the 7 continents, running, swimming and climbing. And one of the most common questions I always get, whether it's on social media or at the end of a talk, is which challenge was the toughest? Well, in this video today, I'm going to break down my 5 toughest challenges to date in order, and I hope you enjoy. Let's begin with number 5. Starting at number 5 would have to be a challenge I called Tenny Fan, which I completed in the summer of 2021. In fact, it was one of the final challenges I took on before I went full-time with my adventures. So this is when it was still very much just a hobby. And that challenge was to hike and summit Penny Fan, the tallest mountain in South Wales, 10 times, non-stop, whilst wearing a 10-kilo weighted vest. In honour of Walking with the Wounded, of course, the mountain has very strong associations with the military, so I wanted to support that incredible charity in the process. I set the goal of 24 hours, so I started at 6 p.m. on the Saturday. This was in August, supposed to be in summer, supposed to have some good weather. Of course, the Brecon Beacons truly delivered, and we had some quite harsh horizontal rain throughout the challenge, especially during the night. But in the end, I managed to complete the whole challenge in 18 hours and 47 minutes. And I remember on the final climb, reaching the summit, holding the charity flag at the top and then checking my watch and seeing not only could I break 20 hours, but I could even potentially break 19 hours. I remember starting to run down, sprint down in fact. Well, it felt like a sprint. It probably looks more like a shuffle to other people on the mountain. I was joined by someone called Chris, a friend who I'd climbed Kilimanjaro with a couple of years before. And as we started to run down, of course, my feet, my shoes had been wet now for 18, 19 hours. So I had quite a few blisters. And I remember about 8 of them popping on the run down. And the pain was excruciating, but the purpose, the motivation was so high to try and beat those 19 hours on the clock that it was all worth it as I stepped through that quite humble finish line of the wooden gate at the bottom where the car park is, and having a few friends and family there, also battling the rain. It was all worth it. But I averaged about an hour and a half to 2 hours per climb, about 5 to 10 minutes at the car park between as my break, eating, drinking and trying to change back into warm and dry clothes. But it was actually the weighted vest which was the hardest part of the whole challenge. I remember after climb number 6, I couldn't even lift my hands above my shoulders. I was in so much pain. My shoulders had seized essentially. And as well, my breathing, it started to affect my breathing towards the end, because every time I breathed in, the weighted vest, because it had plates on both the back and the front, would pull in a little bit and tighten on my breathing. So that added up as well, especially as we reached sort of hours 17, 18 and approached 19. But it was an incredible challenge, a true test of endurance, true test of weather as well, and battling those conditions of the Brecon Beacons. But it's one I'll always have fond memories of, especially as one of my final big challenges before I went full-time with my adventures. Number 4 would have to be my experience on Mont Blanc, the tallest mountain in Western Europe and the tallest mountain in the Alps. Mont Blanc stands at around 4,500 metres tall, so it's far from the tallest mountain in the world. It's far from the highest altitude, especially compared to, say, the Himalayas. But the thing with mountains, and the little bit of experience I do have in the mountains, is it's all down to our individual experience at the time. Depending on the conditions of the mountain, the time of the year, and our own individual experience, those who we're climbing with, the people around us, our own personal ability and fitness at the time, our mindset, our motivation, those all really add up in the mountains. And it means 2 people could climb the same mountain and have a totally different experience and have a totally different difficulty too on the mountain. And for me, Mont Blanc was especially difficult because it was my first time ever using winter mountaineering skills. It was my first time using ropes and crampons and an ice axe. And I'd gone to Mont Blanc to try and learn these skills, and I was working with a local expedition company. We had 4 climbers to 2 guides, and I remember getting to summit day. One of the climbers had dropped out because of fatigue and exhaustion. Unfortunately, I'd been paired up to go one-on-one with one of the guides so we could try and push ahead a little bit faster. And by summit day, there'd already been huge rumours circulating around the huts, the mountain huts on the way up, people talking about the bad conditions and all the groups so far that summer having to turn around because of crevasses and different issues. I remember getting to summit day, setting off one-on-one with my guide Fabio. We're roped together. In case one of us is to fall, we can try and catch each other and save each other's lives. He's ahead of me, I'm just about a metre behind him. And it was so cold, it was so windy that it simply wasn't worth the energy to shout over. For actually 6 hours, we didn't speak one word to each other. I remember listening above us for avalanches, checking the ground below us for crevasses. And after about 6 hours of this, I remember there was this huge contrast in the ground as it went from white snow essentially to ice, which was blue. It was ice essentially with the sun reflecting off it. It was the most sharp contrast from white to blue. And I've not spent a lot of time in the mountains, but I'm very aware that ice is very dangerous. It's very unpredictable, and it's a scary thing when you do come across it, especially on a summit day. I remember Fabio in front of me slowly turning around, pulling down this buff which had been protecting his face from the wind, and he shouted over the wind, "If one of us fall, we can no longer catch each other." And he said it staring at me right in the eye. I remember in that moment my body just being consumed with fear. I'm not afraid to admit that. And in fact, I've been working with this mindset company at the start of my career about turning fear and nerves into focus. It's not easy, but it is absolutely possible. And you can do that by sometimes just asking yourself, in this moment, why am I so scared? Well, on Mont Blanc, on that summit day, it was a very simple question with a very simple answer. I'm up one of the most dangerous mountains in the world. I've never climbed a mountain like this before, never used winter mountaineering skills. And the person there to teach me these skills and keep me safe has just admitted he can no longer do so. It was understandable to be so scared. And actually by accepting that, I was actually able to turn that fear into focus. I remember him turning around, pulling the buff back up his face and taking the next step. And as we had to traverse across this ice with our heels facing the top of the mountain and our toes facing down, just feeling so lonely, feeling just petrified. I made myself a promise if I was lucky enough to get up and summit and get back down, I would never return to that mountain. And fortunately that happened. I was able to get up there. We were one of the only groups to summit that day, and I was lucky to get back down. And I will keep that promise. I will never return to climb Mont Blanc. And my respect for those who do climb these incredible peaks has only gone on up and up. So that would have to be challenge number 4. Number 3, I think might surprise a few people. Number 3 is actually the longest project I've ever taken on in terms of time. And that was 14 months. And that was to run 7 marathons on all 7 continents in the most remote way possible, to become one of the youngest members in history of the 7 Continents Marathon Club. Over 14 months, I ran through the Agafay Desert in Africa, the Wadi Rum Desert, the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center in North America, running surrounded by brown bears and wolves and reindeers. It was an incredible day. The Australian outback, the Amazon rainforests in South America. Was the first person in history to run on the indigenous land of the Quechua community. The elders and leaders very kindly invited us to go out there and run on their land when they found out what we were doing. The Arctic Circle in Europe, and then Antarctica, the final marathon, the final continent, the coldest, windiest, driest place on Earth. It was minus 25 degrees with wind chill at the time of the marathon. It was so cold, in fact, that the final piece of advice the support crews gave us before sending us out on this marathon was enjoy, but remember not to sweat. Because if you sweat, your clothes can actually freeze, and that can lead to frostbite. That's a very tough challenge to complete whilst running. You have to run fast enough you don't get cold and hypothermic, but slow enough you don't begin to sweat. And that was a challenge that many of us struggled with. Myself included, I had to change my base layers twice, had to run into one of these little tents to change. I remember as we were running, a few people were losing their sensations in their fingers and their hands and in their feet too, and had to speak to doctors and medics. But crossing that finish line at Union Glacier on the 13th of December 2023, completing that 14-month long challenge was a true privilege. But I think the greatest challenge of all of it, if I look at it as a whole, was the contrasts. It was starting in the heat of the deserts, hot, humid. I mean, it was 40 degrees in that first desert out in the Agafay Desert in Morocco. It was chased by a pack of wild dogs too. The Amazon, as I mentioned, incredibly hot, incredibly humid rainstorms, and then finishing in the cold of the Arctic and the Antarctic, where you have to try and manage your body temperature to a different level. I think the greatest challenge of that whole project would have to be the contrasts in the weather, the conditions, the wildlife, and everything else in between. So that would be my third hardest challenge to date. Challenge number 2, we're getting very close now to the hardest one, would be the 17 marathons in 17 consecutive days I ran in 2022 in honour of the 17 years my granddad lived with dementia. This was the first challenge I'd ever taken on after I went full-time with my adventures. My granddad was the reason I went on my first adventure at 19 years old. So 3 years later at 22, when I decided to take this leap to go full-time, I knew I had to honour him with my first full-time project. The idea was to run 17 marathons in 17 different locations all around the UK, which were home to research labs for this incredible charity, to honour the 17 years not only he struggled and suffered with this illness, but all the family members, the friends, the carers and nurses suffered too. I always knew that challenge was going to be incredibly tough. Of course, to run any consecutive marathons is tough, let alone 17, with only 3 months training too, I should say. But I never expected the first challenge to come so soon. I remember on day 2, waking up, turning on my phone, and my phone just blew up with messages. And quite selfishly, I can admit, I thought they were going to be messages of congratulations, well done on day 1, good luck for day 2. But they weren't. Instead, they were messages almost of condolence. I'm so sorry to hear what's happened. I've just seen the news. Hopefully you can try another time. I was incredibly confused, and as I turned on the news, I saw it was the start of Storm Ernest, the UK's worst storm in over 30 years. And understandably, the location we were supposed to run that day, and actually for the next few days, cancelled on us. They said it was too dangerous to run on their grounds and on their university running tracks because trees had fallen down and it caused really serious issues. The storm had affected lots of people who were losing homes and jobs, roads were being blocked. And I remember determined not to quit on my first challenge, especially so early into it, getting back into the car and driving back home to London and starting in the evening and running around my little neighbourhood, battling the wind. It was like running on a treadmill and trying to look up and dodge any falling trees. It was really tough, but that storm passed as they always do, and the next few days got better. And then by day 10, I was hit with my real big challenge when I woke up with shin splints, a chest infection and a fever, all 3 in one go. I remember actually I was in so much pain I woke up in shivers. It was something I've never experienced since. It was the first time I'd ever experienced it. And I remember my mum, my parents were my chief support crew at the time. This was at the very beginning before I could hire a professional support crew. My parents were my chief support crew. And I remember my mum knocking on my room and coming in and seeing me in this state. I remember her looking me in the eyes and saying, "Son, do you want to run today?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Do you want to quit?" And I said, "No." And she looked at me, and I can remember the pain in her eyes. I can see it now. And she said, "Well, you better get out there and start running." And I got out of bed, I rolled over, put on my running shoes, and that first 5 kilometres on day 10 took 3 hours. I'm pretty sure that's not even a walking pace, that's far slower. I couldn't even stand on my left leg, it was like glass. And my dad was running around to all the local doctors and physios, phoning them up, and they all refused to work with us. They said they wouldn't work with us until I stopped running. And naively, but maybe quite bravely, as a young 22-year-old adventurer starting this new journey, I said I don't want to work with anyone who doesn't understand how important this is and understand the values of this project, that I will not quit. And the truth is, if I had to, I would have crawled. And as long as I completed that 26.2 miles in 24 hours, I would have got it done. Again, I think that day 10 took 9 hours in the end. Day 11 took close to 8 hours. And then on day 12, a friend joined who was a former medic in the army, now a paramedic, and she taught me the skill to wrap these ice packs around the shins. She said it was something that she used with her soldiers back in Afghanistan. It wasn't necessarily going to help and fix the problem, but maybe it would just numb the pain and let me get through these 17 days. And miraculously, it started to work. We came up with a strategy to change these ice packs 4 times during each marathon, and it really helped. The next few days got better and better. I started to shuffle. Day 15 started to jog. Day 16 started to run again. And by day 17, I sprinted over the finish line, surrounded by family and friends. And I reflected on that challenge often. I talk about it when I go and visit schools or do my talks. And I spoke to my mum too a few months after that project, and she said setting me off and watching me set off on day 10 was the most painful moment of her life, seeing her son go through that pain. But I have so much respect for that moment, for my mum. I have respect for my mum in many ways, but especially for that day. Because what she did, she didn't tell me to run and she didn't tell me to quit. She simply gave me the responsibility to make that decision for myself. And responsibility is one of the most powerful things we can have on these challenges, these adventures, and maybe in life when things go wrong and you can say, I'm here because I chose to be here. I'm not here because someone else is telling me to do this, but I'm here because I chose to be here. You take that responsibility. So if things do go wrong, you also take the blame. It's an incredibly powerful feeling, and it got me through those 7 or 8 days with shin splints and consecutive marathons. And I'll always look back on that challenge and be incredibly proud of that moment. I decided to take that first step on day 10. It wasn't crossing the finish line on day 17 that is my proudest moment. It was that day 10, taking that first step out of bed, completing that first 5 kilometers in 3 hours. Very slow, but just keeping moving forward, because that has been the answer, truthfully, for the majority of my adventures. It's never about being perfect, it's never about being the fastest, it's simply about giving my all and never quitting. And finally, number 1, my toughest challenge to date was called Swimming the 7 Seas. This was a project I completed last year in summer in 2024 with the goal to swim 7 marathons across the classical 7 seas in under 7 weeks. And in the end, over 7 weeks, I swam through the Red Sea in Egypt, the Arabian Sea in Oman, the Aegean Sea in Greece, Adriatic Sea in Italy, the Black Sea in Turkey, the Mediterranean Sea in Spain, and finally back home in the North Sea in the UK. And like the Running on the 7 Continents project, the contrasts were huge. Started in the Red and Arabian Seas. They were always destined to be 2 of the hardest swimming in those conditions, especially in summer. The Arabian Sea alone actually was 31.6 degrees sea temperature. It was like swimming in a hot bath, offered huge issues of dehydration and sunburn, especially as a redhead. And then finishing back home in the North Sea, which was closer to 15 to 16 degrees, which is a little bit colder. But actually, if I was to write a list of the 5 hardest parts of that challenge alone, the truth is the swimming wouldn't even be on the top 5. I was really prepared and trained. I was in a really healthy place going into that challenge, injury-free and ready. But it was the logistics which made that challenge so difficult. I had decided after the 7 Continents runs, which had taken 14 months, to add another level of difficulty to try and complete these swims in 7 weeks, and that offered some huge challenges. Anyone who's taken on a big swim, especially an open water swim, will know that weather windows are a huge factor we have to look at and plan in our logistics. Usually you hope to have 7 to 10 days for a big swim, but because of this challenge, because of all the travel needed, this is 7 seas, 7 countries, across 3 different continents, that actually we only were able to have on average 2 to 3 day weather window in each place, which meant sometimes we were just having to deal with the conditions we were dealt. And that meant some swims, like the Aegean Sea, having to start late in the afternoon, which meant we were battling sunset. Of course, you never want to swim in the dark. It offers lots of challenges and dangers for you and your support crew not being able to see you. And it was an incredibly tough challenge logistically to finish a swim and then get straight on a plane or into a car and moving on to the next place. It didn't allow any time to recover physically or mentally. And for 7 weeks, it was just non-stop. However, finishing that final swim in the North Sea and walking onto the sand at Margate, I became the first person in history to run marathons on 7 continents and swim marathons in all 7 seas. And I received 2 Guinness World Records in the process for the first and fastest person. And that made it all worth it. So that has been a recap of the 5 toughest challenges of my career to date. I'm very much still at the beginning of my journey, but it is really great sometimes to reflect on what's happened over the last few years. I wonder if maybe some of these challenges and the order of the list have surprised you. But either way, I hope you've enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thank you for watching.